Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It's Thursday, the 20th of September, 2012, and we have a really fun event for tonight. Bob Gliner, the filmmaker, is here. His movie is Schools That Change Communities, and Dana McCauley, a principal of one of the schools featured in the film, is with him. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks to both of you for being here. The Future of Education is a Web 2.0 Labs project. We express appreciation to Mighty Bell and Blackboard Collaborate. I'm on my Hack Your Education tour. I'm currently in Portland, leaving tomorrow for Seattle, doing these community-based meetings on education. They're at hackyoureducation.com. If you're in one of the cities on the list there, we'd love to see you. The Learning 2.0 virtual conference recordings are all up. That took place in August. A terrific set of sessions, just amazing speakers, all free and all available. The Future of Libraries conference comes up October 3rd through 5th. We're just about to put the final schedule up. This is a really, really exciting year. Lots and lots of activity. 2 days, 24 hours a day of sessions, and then in November our Global Education Conference, 5 days, 24 hours a day, both just rolling ahead full steam. Lots and lots of fun. Coming up on the Future of Education next week, Nikhil Goyal will talk about his new book, One Size Does Not Fit All. Then, not on this schedule, but immediately afterwards is going to be a student panel, a student voices panel, and I'll post that on my blog, more information then. Ron Richhart talks about making thinking visible. We have the true history of the MOOC on the 26th, Tom Vander Ark on Getting Smart on the 27th. And then October 9th, Kirsten Olsen's going to talk about her book, Wounded by School. Can't wait to talk about that in Blake Bowles on Better Than College. Lots of variety in these topics, as you can tell. If you've missed any of the sessions, they are all recorded, both in full Blackboard Collaborate format and in MP3. Charles Fidel talked about 21st century skills yesterday. Jamie Vollmer talked about community activities in order to encourage schools, very much in line with tonight's show. Again, futureofeducation.com, all 300 plus interviews up there. So we're going to skip the map today with a small studio audience. The Mighty Bell space for this show, where I've collected some of the resources from Bob's films and also around place-based education, are at this link here, and I would encourage you to do that. Gina started the Ning program 5-6 years ago, and she's now doing Mighty Bell, and I'm consulting for her and glad to be doing so. Always produces great projects for education. So Bob, it's fun to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm interested in kind of drilling down with Dana, since we have her here with us. But before we do so, I wanted to ask you a couple sort of overview questions. Bob, why do you think the connection between schools and their communities feels so separate or awkward for most schools?
I think we've just had a history of, when we think about schools, we just think about these separate buildings. Students go into the classroom. I think the outside community hopes things will work out, or more recently there's been a lot of questions about what's going on, but I think we've just found this line between the two. And when I went to try and make this film, I found that there weren't a lot of schools doing community-based education. In fact, I had to talk to numerous people all over the country just to find the schools that I had on the show. And so we've had this kind of, I think, a long historical period of schools just being viewed as separate from the communities that they're a part of, and also the curriculum being completely often separate from community issues that students see when they leave the school. But once they get into school, they seem divorced from the curriculum. And I think with No Child Left Behind and somewhat with Race to the Top legislation, where schools are focusing on teaching to tests and math and language arts, that's been even more exacerbated.
So there felt like a real commonality of the schools and organizations that you look at in this film. and I would say it was passionate individuals. Is there a connection, do you think, between the kind of power or influence of a single individual in these circumstances?
I think there definitely is, and I don't know if that's a plus or a minus, because then the school becomes dependent on one person to drive the program. But I think Dana can talk more to this, but Dana was a driving force at Cullen Elementary School when she first came, and still is today. And at the other schools I visited, there seemed to be one or two key people that drove the community-based education. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is that teacher ed programs around the United States don't prepare teachers to do community-based education, and schools themselves aren't organized around community-based education. So it takes an individual to really, a charismatic individual, to drive these programs. And when I researched other schools who had been doing this, I found that when certain people left the school, the program has basically collapsed. So there's not an institutional basis for doing community-based education, which is one of the real challenges, I think, both for training teachers and for schools who should be doing this. On the other hand, I think, as I hope the film testifies and Dana can talk about, is that what the schools that do community-based education get tremendous results. The students are more vibrant, they're more involved in their educations, they become more active and literate democratic citizens, they know about the problems facing both the communities and the larger society, and they know how to become active participants in the society.
It's easy for, how am I going to phrase this? It feels somewhat interesting to me to think about the parallel between student initiative and educator initiative, and the educators that you profiled in the communities. And Dana's going to be modest. She's going to not claim individual responsibility for what took place. But so let's say they're a team of people or people who are sort of passionately interested. It feels to me like they're sort of exemplifying the very kind of self-initiative that the students end up developing in the programs. Do you think there's a connection between the kind of bureaucratic school system and the difficulty in giving educators that kind of freedom to initiate?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that the more schools are controlled by larger bureaucracies, by state initiatives and state mandates in terms of testing, the more removed teachers are from being able to develop and control a curriculum, and then the more divorced students also become from the curriculum itself. I think that the schools that I've profiled, the students are actively engaged in helping teachers create the curriculum. And to have that kind of an atmosphere, you have to set up that kind of an atmosphere to make it happen. And unfortunately, a lot of schools are under all these other pressures, and so it's not happening there.
Okay. Bob, how did you learn about place-based education?
Well, this show follows, in some ways, a logical path from two earlier programs, which we talked about last year when I was on your show. I did a show in 2007, Democracy Left Behind, which critiqued No Child Left Behind as narrowing the curriculum, particularly in terms of creating informed and engaged students in terms of democratic society. And then last year I did the show Lessons from the Real World, which focused on Portland, Oregon's schools that weave social issues through the curriculum. And it seemed like a logical extensions that if you're going to think about social issues, why not get the students outside the walls of the classroom to actually engage the community, because they need community help to be able to solve a lot of the problems that they might be faced with if they're actually dealing with real problems in the community. So that's the more theoretical answer. One of the pragmatic answers is that I met a person, Greg Smith, who with a guy named David Sobel. Greg Smith teaches in the Graduate School of Education at Lewis and Clark in Portland, and he and David Sobel co-authored a book called Place and Community-Based Education in Schools. And so I happened to be teaching a class here at San Jose State, and I used that book, and a lot of the schools they talked about in there, some of them don't do place-based education anymore, but some do, and that led me on this path to begin exploring where I could go in the United States to deal with place-based education. And in fact, David Sobel, he's at Antioch University in New England. He's the one who told me about Crellin School where Dana is. Otherwise,
So
I never
Dana,
found them because it's very active.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah.
No, I just finished that. Go ahead.
Okay, so Dana, they knew about you, or they knew about Crellin. Would you have used the phrase place-based education in what you're doing? Was that your background of material for the projects that you did, or how did you come to this way of thinking about education?
Well, when I first came to Crellin, and the story goes back about 11 years. This is my 11th year here. When we started some different initiatives and started really looking at changing the culture of the school, and sort of began to dive into doing things differently, one of our learning partners said to me one day, Vicki Fenwick, said, "You know, what you're talking about is place-based education." And I kind of looked at her and said, "Well, I don't care what you call it. This is just the right thing to do. It feels right, and this is the way we're going to go." So I didn't know what we were doing with place-based education. We just knew as a staff that this was good stuff, and the kids were engaged, parents were jumping on board, and we began to see a real shift in the culture, in the way things were done, not just at the school but in the community, and in the community's relationship with the school.
What brought you to Crellin?
Well, I was an elementary teacher, and then I went for 7-8 years, and then I went to central office, and I was responsible for all the staff development in the county. And I missed being with kids, but I liked being in charge. So when the position at Crellin became open, I'm actually a teaching principal. We have 118 kids now this year, and when you have less than 200 children in your building, you get to teach 2-3 hours a day in addition to being principal. And that intrigued me. I loved that idea. I loved the idea of still being able to be the instructional leader of the school, but also having that responsibility of having to stand in front of the kiddos, stand in front of those kids and teach. I liked having that, so that's what brought me. When the position came open, I thought, that's what I want to do.
So in the movie Crellin, the community is represented as being kind of a down-on-its-luck community prior to a lot of this. Had you grown up in that area, or was it just the job that attracted you, or were you actually attracted to the circumstances of the community?
Well, I did not grow up in this area. I actually grew up in Pittsburgh and then Severna Park, Maryland, and then I moved to Western Maryland. And I taught the school that I taught in my central office, the central office where I had worked previous to coming here, only about 5-6 miles away. And my home was only 5 or 6 miles away, yet I had never been to Crellin. There wasn't a place you went to. There was no, if you were going to Crellin, you were kind of going through Crellin to get to the Dairy Queen, which is in West Virginia. So that was the only reason you could come through the town. So I had never really been out here before. And I didn't know a whole lot about it other than, some folks said, "Really? You want to go to Crellin? Why would you want to go there?" I said, "Well, what's wrong with that? Yeah, I want to go there." And so, and then coming out, and it just fell in love with it. It just fell in love with the place.
So there's a degree to which, or maybe it's even said in the film, that it feels like this school kind of holds the community together. Have you learned some lessons about empowering students and their families in terms of thinking about their own learning?
Absolutely. Well, when we first found the Orange Water, which is the whole AMD project that sparked all of this, and we knew we wanted to do something. The first thing we did was bring the community in. And we said, look, there's this property behind the school that is serving as a dumping site. It's truly like this is where people brought their trash and just threw it in the fields. And it was right on the river, right behind the school. And we kind of looked around and said, well, what do you guys want? Is this what you want your community to look like? What do you want? Oh, no, we want, when we were young, they'd say you used to be able to ride your bike through town. Now there's no place to ride your bike. When we were young, you used to be able to do this. And, and so the parents and the grandparents began talking about what it was like. And so then the question was, well, what would you like it to be? And they said, we want something different for our kids. I said, well, what would that look like? What do you want it to look like? And they began, I had the initial chart that they, on their skit, Angie Heimbaugh, one of our moms, stood up and just started writing on the chart what people wanted. And we said, okay, let's see if we can make that happen then. And they, so then it became we needed the community's help, and the community needed our help. And so we talk about tearing the walls down of the school, because there used to be a very symbolic row of trees that separated the back of the playground with the rest of the community. And those trees needed to come down. Those trees came down and opened it up. And it was sort of like a way of inviting everybody in, and this is your school, this is your community. What do you want it to be? And they didn't want the kids, out there smoking and drinking in the schoolyard. They didn't want all the trouble that was happening sort of down in the middle of town. They wanted to change it, and said, well, you guys are the only ones who can change it, So it's just we couldn't have done it without the community. There was no way to move it, and the community wanted something different.
So I want to come back. Go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to elaborate on something that Dana said, which is, if people haven't seen the film, one of the things that really attracted me to this school when I talked to Dana on the phone was she said there was this orange water in the stream that runs behind the school, which was created by acid mine drainage from the former coal industry in the area. And the school and the community cleaned up the stream, and that became an integral part of their curriculum. And so they didn't separate what was going community problems from the curriculum. And so they viewed the stream, clean up, and continue to monitor the stream as a way of teaching math, science, and other kinds of lessons. And so it becomes this interdisciplinary curriculum that revolves around concrete problems in the community. And the other thing that attracted me, which they've been working on now, is there's a fracking site going on in the watershed nearby the school, or in the watershed that feeds into the school. And so they were, when I was there, and which is on the film, they started monitoring the water above and below the fracking site. And so there you have a concrete thing which is affecting the whole United States, which is gas drilling, and to see what impact it has on the watershed. So you have the students involved not only in a local issue, but in an issue that affects a lot of people all around the United States.
What everybody
Bob?
was viewing,
Go ahead, Dana.
I'm sorry. What everybody was viewing as a problem, which was, when we dug down and figured out what was going on, that orange water was acid mine drainage, and that what was viewed as the problem truly became the opportunity. It was taking that problem and saying, oh, good, look, there's something we can all join forces and work towards. That became the opportunity. And it wasn't about blaming anyone, because a lot of the granddads and the uncles and the dads used to work or still work in those mines. So nobody did anything on purpose. In fact, when the mine was here and the train was here and the tipple, that was all to support the war. So, our little town had a piece of that history. So it wasn't about placing blame. It was, okay, well, no one really realized what you were doing. You did what you had to do. Now let's work together to make it better. Let's change. And in changing that, you're changing the culture, because it wasn't us against them. Sort of what Bob alluded to earlier. It was they needed us, we needed them. Here we go. Let's make this better. Let's make this community one that people want to move into, not where people move out of, but one that attracts people. Even though, if you blink your eyes, you're through the town, it's still a great little town to live in,
So let me paint a quick picture here.
Okay.
So the school gets involved in a community project. The community comes together and really gets excited about it. The school becomes kind of the center, or the holding. It holds the community together in really sort of lovely ways. The test scores go up. In fact, I think they were your highest test scores in the state, right? And yet Bob says it was really, there weren't that many schools doing this kind of education.
Right.
So what's the disconnect, Dana?
I think that in something that you and Bob were speaking to earlier, when you talked about the role of the principal, and I really felt like my role was my teachers are professionals. They know their stuff, and they love it. and they love kids, was to give them permission to do what they knew was best. So I'm not going to tell you what you have to use when you teach your kids to read. You know what those kids need. I'm not going to tell you, I'll introduce you to some new strategies. If you feel you need more, I can provide that for you. But empowering those teachers the same way I wanted them to empower the kids, the same way we wanted to empower the community. Everybody has to be able to do that, not just a select few. And so in my role as the principal, and the one that they turn to, and I look at them and say, you know what to do. Make it happen. And if you need my help, let me know. But you've got great ideas. You know your kids. You know how to get them there. I trust you. And that's exactly what you want to tell the kids. And that's exactly what you want to tell the parents and in the community. So it was allowing them to give up a little bit of that control issue that sometimes people have, and saying to the kids, what do you want to learn about? Because we know the standards. We know what we have to teach them. Why not do it in a way that's going to interest the kids? Why not do it in a way that's going to be completely and totally relevant to them when they are walking home from school? And they look and they say, oh yeah, we cleaned that up today. Or we were doing chemistry testing in the water today. The pH level is 6.5, or whatever it is. So it's allowing them to sort of explore those different options and making it really, really relevant for the kids so there's a reason to learn it. And it affects them immediately, and it affects their community. And then they turn around and look and they say, we did that. Look what we built. Look what we improved. That's empowering.
I think, can I jump in here?
Sure.
I think one of the disconnects that you ask about is that, a couple things. One is that our colleges and universities, let alone our public schools, don't really teach students about community organizing or future teachers about community organizing. And second thing is that when you do this kind of curriculum, you have to, as Dana points out, you have to be very flexible because community problems don't necessarily stack up in terms of a 50-minute class period or the school day or the school calendar. And so you have to be willing to flow with a lot of things. When I visited Dana's school and the other schools, you have to make time to do these kinds of things. They don't happen on a real set calendar. And so you have to be willing to do that. And the other thing is as Dana points out, the teachers have to want to put the energy out to be able to help create their own curriculum. And nationally, it's kind of going in the opposite direction. Even though a lot of teachers would like to create their own curriculum, the state or various states or boards of education are mandating they teach a standardized curriculum or teach to the script or something like that. And so those are at odds with this kind of community-based education, even though it seems to make logical sense that, again, if students are involved with the community, they're involved with issues that affect their lives, they're going to be far more motivated to learn the basics as well as a lot of other important things than they would be if they're just drilled every day, hour by hour in math, language arts or science and so forth. And then they just become disaffected from the schools, and they either drop out or they just memorize the stuff and they forget it as soon as they leave the classroom and so forth. So I think one of the reasons I did the film was to show that, hey, this is a way we can really maybe take another look at what we really mean by educational reform in the United States. Maybe we should be reforming the curriculum in this context rather than just tweaking what's going on in the classroom.
Well, and I think that,
go ahead, Dana.
Piggybacking on what Bob's saying is that we know the standards. Absolutely, we know the state standards, we know the national standards, we know them. We have looked at them backwards and forwards. We sit and we look at how does it progress from one grade to the next. What level of understanding do the kids need to have? What skills and processes do they need to have? How you go about teaching that, those standards, because we're all going for it. We all want, college and career-ready kids. How you go about teaching that is what can be different. The activities that you use, the projects that you use, those can be different and relevant. The standards are the standards, and we're all working toward them, but it's the method that you're getting to get there. A lot of people say, when do you ever find time to go out and measure the trees? Well, I teach measurement in math. I do that instead of doing the problems in the book. Instead of teaching the kids just the had to calculate area and perimeter, they're planning that garden, and they need to figure out how much space they need, how much fencing we need, how much mulch is needed. There's your volume. So it's looking at, and those are standards that kids need to have. It's just going about it in a completely different way and making that relevant to what we're doing here and to what's happening in the community.
I don't want to draw an inappropriate connection, but Dana, I'm wondering if the fact that you came into a school in a town that was struggling, and that some of Bob's other examples are places where it feels like the system has failed, if there isn't a connection between the ability to do this and be creative that you might not have in a more affluent or more sort of successful, in quotes, situation.
Well, I think kids are kids. Kids, it doesn't matter where they come from. Kids are kids. Their experiences they bring to the table are quite different, but nonetheless all valuable. So I think it depends on the community. I think every parent that I know of never says to a child, well, go to school and cause some trouble, or, they want their kids to do the best and to be the best they can be no matter where they are. But I think it's a trust issue. I think sometimes it becomes a trust issue as to, well, what are you gonna do here? We're already doing this, that, and the other, so we don't need any of that. Because people get nervous, people get scared, teachers get scared. Teachers get scared when they think about those test scores and what's going to happen. I said, don't worry about it. I'm the first to go. The principal's the first one if something happens. Don't worry about it. So it's I don't know if it would be different to do it in an affluent area. I think you can look around and you can find things in a community that can always be improved upon, or changed or studied, if nothing else for the history value of it. So I don't know. Bob, what do you think when you saw it in the different schools?
Well, I even though I did pick schools that were in challenging circumstances. For example, the school in Boston that's in a high crime area, high poverty area, and in Watsonville, California, faced by numerous immigration issues and other kinds of problems in the community. Nevertheless, I taught for years at San Jose State in the heart of Silicon Valley, and I'm talking to you today from Silicon Valley. And when I tried to research this issue, and my previous one, by the way, about weaving social issues into the classroom, and I know a lot of educators here in the Valley, nobody could point me to a school in Silicon Valley, which is the high-tech capital of the world, that was an innovative, supposedly technologically innovative capital of the world, that's doing this kind of community-based education. So here we are, and Silicon Valley, not all the neighborhoods are affluent, but there are plenty of affluent neighborhoods, and those schools are doing fancy stuff with technology, but they're not doing this kind of community-based education where the students are going out, taking down the walls between the classroom and the community, and actually using the community as a resource around which to build a curriculum. So I don't think it's, they pride themselves on high test scores in a lot of the areas of Silicon Valley, but I don't know if they pride themselves on that they're turning out future critical citizens of a democratic society.
The connection I was trying to make was with the latitude to do something different that might be provided in a situation where, say, in Silicon Valley, there would be such kind of political and parental pressure to do things the way they're currently done. So again, I don't mean to belabor the point, but is it possible there's a connection between the difficulty of circumstance and the willingness to allow a principal like Dana to do something different?
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, because I think in a lot of ways they probably feel we've got nothing to lose. Students are cutting class, they have lousy test scores, so let's give those schools a chance to try something different. So I would agree with you. I would agree with you around that.
Dana, are there other schools local to you who have come and sought to follow your example, or do you find that that you're not influencing the other local schools?
I think there are definitely some schools in the area. I know there's some in neighboring West Virginia that the superintendent of that school, actually, of the school district, actually came over and is really looking at implementing what we're doing here throughout his whole, all of his schools. But in our immediate area, we definitely have some schools who are looking at doing more environmental activities and getting the kids more engaged in the environment piece of it. In terms of they're looking at that in terms of a problem-based environmental issue and looking at, okay, environmentally what's going on, and then using that issue as a springboard for the kids to do a lot of investigations, and then, the what if we did it this way, what would happen, and that sort of thing. But in terms of, and I think, I do have to say that in all of the schools, there's a push right now to open the doors more and to get a lot more parent involvement and to bring, more parents involved in what's happening in the schools. I think that what happened here at Crellin was unique because it hadn't been that way in this community for forever. And so that's what was different. And a lot of our parents did not have a really positive school experience. And so, they sort of had, I can remember having one conversation my first year here where parents said, well, this and this and this was done to me, and you're not going to do that to my kids. And I remember sitting there listening saying, oh my golly, I would never do that to a child. That would be terrible. That experience that they brought to the table, and then seeing us sort of saying, well, no, that's not what we're doing here. That's not what we're about, and changing their opinion of what school is was rather a unique experience. So I do think that there is an effort to try to get more parental and community involvement in the schools. I think that maybe sometimes people aren't sure how to make that happen and how to do it effectively.
One thing that I think is important that emerges in all the schools I focused on, but particularly in Dana's school and in Young Achievers in Boston, is that teachers support each other, and I think a lot of teachers around the country often feel isolated, particularly not so much in terms of maybe salary issues and so forth, but they feel isolated in terms of curriculum development. And I witnessed at Dana School teachers frequently team teaching. If one teacher didn't know something, they didn't feel tight about asking another teacher, how am I going to make this work in the community, or they brought other kinds of community experiences together. And so I think what's important about community-based education to be successful, one of the things seems to me is that it has to be like an interdisciplinary approach. It can't be, even though one classroom could probably go out and do something in the community, they'd be far more effective if you have multiple classes going out, approaching it from different academic perspectives, and then working together, because it gives you a lot more time during the school day to do that. And it gives the students a sense that, problems aren't just a math problem, it's not just an English problem, it's not a science problem, but it's an interdisciplinary problem, and to approach it that way. And I think then when parents begin to see that, they don't just see this, well, I don't know that much about math, so I can't help out, but parents might know something about something else, and so that permits more parents to get involved also.
Bob, I think you bring up a really good point, and not only sharing in the expertise of the teachers, because we all have our own strengths, but the expertise, you're right, of those community members who are coming in, and we call them our learning partners. And so when we're inviting our learning partners to come in, or they're coming in and saying, hey, I have this to offer, we look at, oh, good, because we don't know how to do that. A lot of the folks that we have coming in to work with our kids are chemists, scientists, they have all kinds of different expertise and talents that we don't have. And so it's also the teachers letting go and saying, okay, you teach the teacher becoming part of, one of the students in the class and learning from that community member. Now the teacher has the expertise in knowing, how do I bring that down to an 8-year-old level? How do I extract that important vocabulary for the kids? How can I turn this into a good, project for them? So it's that kind of that team teaching, but not just among the teachers, but among the teachers and the community members who we invite in, or who come in.
Dana, are there policy implications for the experiences that you've had? If you could wave a magic wand and ask the state or the federal government to do something that would be supportive of this kind of education, what would it be?
Oh, wow, magic wand. I would love to have a magic wand. Where would I start? Where would it be? I think it would be giving the schools and the principals and the teachers of the schools more freedom, more latitude in how they're going to make some things happen. I think that, you know, I don't need to tell my teachers how to tell how to teach a child to read. They know how to do that. And I don't even need to actually give them the books they need. I need to provide them with what they tell me they need. But the teachers are professional enough to know that child needs more work in this area, this one needs work in this area, one needs work in this area. And then me being able to give them the resources and the time they need to say, okay, what would that look like? What's the best case scenario this year for these kids on this day? Because it changes constantly. And so you need to have, also with that magic wand, I would allow it to be a little more fluid and flexible, so that as the needs of the kids change, the teachers have permission and the expectation that they need to also be changing, and get rid of any of that rigid guidelines that you have, so that the teachers can totally. It's about the kids. It's supposed to be all about the kids and giving the kids what they need, not about what makes us feel good. It's about what makes the kids, learning and what makes them feel good. So I think that if we could kind of turn the focus that way, and in order to do that, we're going to need to be a little more flexible and allow the teachers to use their professional judgment more often.
Flexibility and freedom they're not really the current buzzwords in the policy debates. I know,
but you said that you were giving me a magic wand, so.
Right. So Bob, you've been looking at this for a while on a variety of levels. Why is there such fear and pushback in this regard?
Well, I think one of the things is that when it comes to, we seem to be a very quantitatively oriented society and a test-based society, and I think increasingly, for whatever reason, the public is on to accountability, and they see accountability locked up with test scores. And so when you think about constantly quantifying things, they feel the shortest distance between the 2 points is to just open up a textbook and try and teach somebody math or science or social studies and so forth, rather than in the community where, as I said earlier, things don't always break down into neat categories, and it might take a while, but the students ultimately learn a lot of other things. And I think so there's a lot of pushback because everybody wants to see results. We've become increasingly results-oriented, and I think technology has driven that as well. Everybody wants instant answers to everything. So there's that. And I also think a lot of times when they think about schools engage with the community, they think there's a political agenda, and they get a values-based education. And so people get worried about that for some reason, even though what they're really doing is they're teaching students, as Dana pointed out earlier, is students working with community members, working with parents, working with people from non-government organizations or nonprofits or government and so forth to help solve a real problem, which is real life. And but oftentimes there's a lot of fear about, we're going to offend some taxpayer, particularly when people are cutting taxes and cutting spending for schools. People are worried about turning off people who might fund their school, and teachers might end up losing their jobs. So I think there's a lot of that kind of thing, and I think that kind of permeates the society, even though there's hundreds of thousands of students and parents and community members who would want to do this kind of thing. It's just somehow enabling them to do it, and I think. I hope one of the goals of the film, is to show that it's possible, and that you can do this. And I tried to pick 5 fundamentally different types of communities so that it would resonate, and also diverse communities, so that it would resonate with a wide audience, and that they could say, well, I don't live in rural Appalachia, but I live in inner city Boston, or I live in inner city Los Angeles, or I live in inner city New York, and I can make this happen there. It's not just in a rural area. Or I live in an area with a lot of people who would, English isn't their first language, say in Watsonville, California. So I wanted to show that it's possible to do it in that kind of school as well. So I think there's just not a lot of models out there, and so that's the beginning, is to begin, as one parent points out, in another school I profiled on the show, which is Young Achievers Science and Math Pilot School in Boston, in the math health section of Boston. The parent at the end of the section says, one of the fundamental things that the school has done is to teach or is to show the community that it's possible to dream again. It's possible for the kids to dream, and it's possible for the parents to dream, that things can be better and we can make an entirely different community. And I hope that the film enables people to see the possibilities. But on a pragmatic level, we're a long way from that point.
I definitely heard themes in the film of, the concern about value-based education maybe. I'm not even sure I heard that in the film, but I thought of it. But definitely I heard in the film the concern about rigor, right? That this seems less rigorous. Does that come up, Bob or Dana? In fact, let's go to Dana. Dana, does that come up for you?
That what seems less rigorous? What?
That this form of education, kind of the working on projects, almost kind of touchy-feely, sort of social justice kind of stuff. Do people feel like that's potentially not rigorous enough?
Well, Sandy Atkins, I love this kind of quote that she gave us one day, and she said, success on any high-stakes test, or even in life, is not about how you handle the familiar, it's about how you handle the unfamiliar. So our goal is to make learning memorable. It's not about memorizing. If all we're going to ask kids to do is memorize a list of really hard words and their meanings that has nothing to do with what might happen in a week or in 2 weeks, then you really haven't taught them anything. So it's not about just taking some really hard math problems and switching them up in different ways so they can do well. So when they see that same exact math problem, they can do it on the test. You haven't really taught them anything, because it's the problem solving that's involved in solving that math problem that will help them problem solve a much different problem later on. That's the learning. So the rigor is, I think, is actually stepped up. Our expectations are extremely high. When we look at the standards, I think one of the reasons that we do so well in the state test is we teach about it. When you look at those standards, that's not the ceiling, that's the floor. That's not, you want to go above that. You want your kids to be able to do that and then more and then some. That's how we look at it, at least. That's how we're looking at it. We think we're stepping it up, not making it easier. And it's not touchy-feely. It's hard work, and it's the kids work extremely hard. Are they having fun? Sure they are. We're making memories. They're not going to forget. They're not going to forget going down to the stream or, and doing the chemical testing. They're going to remember that later on when they're wondering why their well water is turning orange or something. They're going to remember what that was about. So that's so what we think we're stepping it up. We think that the rigor we've increased it, not decreased it.
Yeah,
it's about handling the unknown later on, not just doing well on the test. How can they take those skills and processes that you've taught them through a real memorable experience and apply it to a completely different situation? That's what you want them to be able to do.
Yeah, I would agree with Dana. The quote you actually used was from another school I profiled. It was from the superintendent of Cottage Grove School District in Cottage Grove, Oregon. And she said when they started at this Kennedy Alternative High School, where the students spend whole days outside of the school walls in various environmental projects, sustainability projects, but then they come back in the classroom and they actually are able to do the lab experiments with the research they've uncovered in the community, and they end up doing much better. And so she was, I think she was expressing that initially she was surprised that this would work, but then she saw that it did work. And in fact, for them, the dropout rate went down and the test scores went up. And they were dealing with students who hadn't had that much success with schools, traditional schools.
Bob, what's your experience been with regard to teachers in these programs? I want to believe that they just sort of immediately adopt and love this style. Is there ever pushback from the teachers themselves?
Well, I think the pushback from teachers probably comes, in fact, it's probably fairly easy for teachers to push back because they're not going to be at one of these schools. There are not that many of these schools, and since the dominant mode of teaching is not community-based education, a place-based education, they just have to push back by going along with the status quo. I think the challenge is the teachers that want to get out and do place-based and community-based education, to focus on issues in the community. That's the challenging part. I think I haven't really experienced, or I wasn't immersed long enough in the schools to experience that kind of pushback by teachers said, I don't want to do this kind of thing because it's going to cost me my job, or the test scores are going to go down. I think the schools that I went to, both on this program and my previous programs, the teachers that were involved because they really wanted to do it, and given the national, what I think 50% of the teachers leave the profession every 5 years right now, and the burnout rate among teachers, I think a lot of teachers would welcome the opportunity to do this kind of curriculum, but unfortunately they're just not at the school where they're able to do it, or they don't see a way of connecting with other teachers or community members to be able to make it a reality. And I hope that they would, you know.
We actually have 2 teachers on staff who have over 30 years of teaching experience in. So they've seen it swing from one end to the other. And when folks ask them, what about retiring, you know, Mrs. Sanders looks and says, I'm having too much fun. I love coming to school. I learn something new every day I come here. This is what it's really about. I wish I would have been doing this years ago, you know. So I think that we didn't see any type of pushback from anyone. I think there was a little bit like, really? We can do that? Okay. How would we do that? You know, and, well, I don't know. We haven't done this before either, but we'll figure it out, you know, and then let's just keep moving. So I don't think that, I think if there's any kind of pushback, I think it's out of fear. I think, Bob, you alluded to that when you said fear of what about my pay, or what about the test scores, or what about, and when you can take that off the table and tell the teachers, which, you know, we did hear it, don't worry about that. I'll worry about that. You just keep moving. I'll worry about the other stuff. Then they were able, okay, that's what she says to do, you know, and then.
I see you as being a pretty charismatic leader, Dana. I mean, I can see people really wanting to follow your leadership role on this, your enthusiasm and the like. Do you find that any teachers from the surrounding areas want to come work at Crellin?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And yeah, absolutely. I hear that quite often. I wish I could come out to Crellin. I wish I could come out to Crellin. But it's interesting because I actually heard a teacher said to me once that she was talking to someone else, and they said, I don't know, they work too hard out there, because it is hard. It isn't easy. We work as long of hours as anyone else. It doesn't just end when the kids leave, because you're constantly, you know, thinking about it, but it's not a downer thinking about it. It's not, oh no, I have to plan that. It's, you're excited about planning it. You want to do it. But we definitely have a lot of teachers who have expressed interest and said, oh, I wish you had some openings. You know, we'd love to come out and be a part of that. So that's nice.
I really still see that. I see that parallel between the engagement of the students and the engagement of the teachers. Go ahead, Bob.
Oh.
Well, I was just going to say one example of the kind of atmosphere at Crellin or Dana is virtually every teacher I interviewed at the end of the interview, and a lot of the parents I interviewed teared up at the end of the interview or during the interview. In fact, we got to joking about we needed a big Kleenex box because they love the school so much, you know. And it would be great to be going to a lot of schools and see that happen. I mean, not that tearing up is always that great, but it was just, we were so emotionally caught up with being at the school, you know, and with helping each other out and helping the community out.
Well, and knowing that you're making a difference. Knowing that what you're doing is why you got into this profession to begin with, because you love kids and you want to see the good things happen. And so when you find yourself a part of that, it just kind of brings that feeling of you of, yes, this is, of triumph, that this is what we're supposed to be doing. And it feels good. And then, of course, it makes you want to do more of it. So it's contagious, it's contagious, and you keep wanting that. It's a good thing.
Do either of you have your own children or grandchildren, and have they gone to this kind of a school?
I do. I have 2 kids, and when I first started teaching or being principal here at Crowland, my kids were actually enrolled in another school, and about a month into it, I brought my kids out here, mainly because of scheduling, and it was just going to be a lot easier, and so I transferred them out here to Crowland. And I actually had a colleague say, "Are you sure you want your kids to go there?" And I kind of, not a colleague here from Crowland, but somewhere else, and I said, if the school isn't good enough for my own kids, no one should be going there then. Right? I mean, it should be. So my children got to have the Crowland experience, we call it. My daughter was in 1st grade, my son was in 2nd grade when I came out here. And it's interesting now, it's a high school. They're in high school now. And they will say to me today, "Oh, Mom, Mr. Oxford at the high school, he could work at Crowland. He could be a Crowland teacher." And I really, what makes him a Crowland teacher? He really cares. He really, and they'll begin telling me who they think could be a Crowland teacher based on their experience here with the staff in the community.
Well, let's see, I have 4 kids. They're grown, and none of them went to this kind of school. And I have 2 grandkids, and they're not currently going to this kind of school either. I don't think, again, as I said earlier, I don't think these schools are typical. I would hope that they would be. I hope that the word spreads about them. But when I did the research to try and find these schools across the country, there's a classroom here and there at not every school, but at some schools that are doing some kind of community project. But to get the whole school involved, or a set of interdisciplinary classes involved in a project is not the rule by any means. So no, I wish they had gone through that kind of experience. I wish I'd gone through that kind of experience when I was going to public school and growing up.
Bob, who will see the film?
The film is it's available currently on DVD off my website for a reasonable price, but it's the main audience is the PBS audience, and most of my films have aired on PBS stations, and this film will start airing on PBS stations in January. So we hope to have a lot of stations carry the program, and we hope that the word spreads about the film. So that's the general audience is various PBS stations that will end up showing the program.
So I just put the link to the webpage for ordering the film and the film information in the chat, so it's recorded there. Sort of as maybe a final topic here for me would be the kind of moving sense of community that comes through the film. I'm trying to remember which example it is, Bob, where there are 3 generations together and they're really working together. Do you remember which school that is?
I think that's in Howard, South Dakota, where Howard is the one part of the film where I took an historical example, and then I brought it up to the present in Howard, which is a small rural town a little over an hour from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The town was going under, like a lot of rural towns in the 90s, and one of the teachers, Randy Perry, who was teaching a business education class, said, we got to get the students involved in trying to save the town. What can we do? And so they developed this whole plan to to get people to spend more money locally, to bring in alternative energy kinds of companies to the town, and cutting-edge technology, small businesses to the town, and they all worked on it together, all the generations. So the high school students, actually, like in their English class, they wrote letters to members of Congress, and Tom Daschle, who was the senator from South Dakota at the time, came to the school, and they got a little bit of federal money. So that was in an English class, and then I think the science classes did research on what was going on in terms of health issues in the community, and so the whole town got together across multiple generations to save the town, and they did. And however, what happened was it was very successful, and they formed a successful nonprofit that they could hopefully use as a way of modeling what they did for other rural towns across the Midwest that were faced with similar problems. And that drew a lot of the good teachers away from the school. So when I was there, I went to the high school to see what was happening now, and it turned out that some of the current students felt left out of the dream that had happened in Howard, and they wanted to see a new set of things happen, and that's what I tried to capture toward the end of that section of the film. But what those students, one of the things those students said to me that I thought was remarkable was when they spoke at these community meetings, as high school students, the grandparents, and the parents all listened to what they had to say. They wanted their feedback. They didn't just say, oh, you're just students, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know what's going on out here. They really wanted them involved, all the generations working together. And so that's the example from the film of that multi-generational approach.
Dana, is this a story about schools or a story about communities, or both? Meaning, have we lost something in our sense of American culture around communities where this is uniquely valuable to refocus, or have schools always played this role?
No, I don't think they've always played. At least they haven't played this role in many places. I'm not sure. I know Bob just said he had a hard time finding schools that actually do this. I do think we need to refocus. You know, they talk about reaching every child, no child left behind. You kind of have to step into their world, and we don't tend to want to do that. We tend to want to just have the child change. The child, we need to change the child. We need to change the child. Sometimes we're the ones who need to be the ones who change, and we need, as the adults, we need to change what we're doing to accommodate what they need. And going into their place, and pulling them all, into the kind of the school environment. School is not always a happy place for people, and so there's a reason why some folks don't look at it as something that's important. Maybe they didn't have a good experience or whatever. So I think it's, I do think that we need to. If you want to reach the child, you need to go where they are. You just can't expect them to follow blindly. So I think it's a story. I'm not sure you can have a really good story about a school without looking at the community. I think you're missing a huge piece if you do that. Then you're getting a very narrow view of it. You're getting only the academic view of it, and that's important. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Just adding on to briefly what Dana said, I think a lot of people really want community in this country, and they're not sure how to go about it. A lot of people create these technology communities, but I think that in itself misses something. It misses the face-to-face, the sense of community that you get from that physical presence. And I think schools could really be a vehicle for forming community or for building community. That both the children and the parents and the grandparents and other community members really want, both, and not just in rural areas, but in urban areas. A lot of our society is very fragmented and very isolated, and schools could serve this purpose in a really good fashion.
I think that's a great way to close. I'm going to clap for you here. Before we sort of sign off, Peggy wanted to know if there were going to be any supplementary materials to the documentary for people trying to do this in their local areas. Is that something you've thought about, Bob?
Well, the film, I put a website on the end of the film. There's a website called Promise of Place, which is a place-based education website. I think there's a few others. We haven't talked about getting into that, but we do link people to that website, or they can explore that website, which features place-based education.
And I put that link in the Mighty Bell. Bob and Dana, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Really delightful to get to know you, Dana, and have you back on, Bob. Coming up on Monday, Nikhil Goyal talks about his book, One Size Does Not Fit All, and then Ron Richhart on Making Thinking Visible. We have a really full week next week, 4 webinars. Thanks to Bob, thanks to Dana, thanks to those of you who have attended or are listening. Take care, everybody. Bye now.